If you're thinking about moving to Kansas City and buying or building a home, this video is for you. We're gonna break down the real pros and cons of making that move. Everything from the very competitive housing market, the lower cost of living, as well as tornadoes. Now, if we haven't met yet, my name's Nick.
I'm Jordan.
We help people buy and build homes all over Kansas City. We've lived here our whole lives, and we're gonna share everything we've learned throughout the process. And that way, by the end of the video, whether you decide to make the move or not, that way you know all the good, all the bad, and everything Kansas City has to offer. Now, I would argue one of the things that makes Kansas City a desirable place to move to is the lower cost of living, the more competitive home prices, depending on who you ask. But that leads us to pro number one, which is cost of living and home prices in Kansas City.
So there's a ton of options depending on where you want to live in Kansas City, especially for affordable housing, whether you want an urban feel or maybe you want a suburban feel. I mean, it's all around the metro in all the different areas. You get a lot of house for your money, and there's also amenities all around the metro.
Now, the reason we said it depends on who you ask is because this is all contextual, right? If you're moving from California, we've got quite a few folks in the process right now. You know, you might see a $500,000 home here, and that could be worth like 1.5 where you're currently at. If you ask a local here, they're probably not going to be very thrilled about where housing prices are. The reason why is because they've certainly increased. They've gone up like 40% over the last 3 years. Yeah, so really what we're saying when you've got competitive home prices is if you're moving from an area with more expensive home prices, you could very well be shocked at what you could get here. At the same time, if you're moving from an area that has even, home prices that are less than here, it might be very expensive. So all depends on where you're moving from. But we're gonna put this map on the screen. It shows 4 main areas of Kansas City. You'll find 5 counties there. So everything at the top, so Platte County, Clay County, that is the Northland. It is a very, very quickly growing area. It's kind of spread out. It feels like a suburb. There are a lot of different cities there. But you can see the pre-existing, the older home prices anywhere from $375 to $310. If you look at Wyandotte, these are going to be some of the lowest home prices you'll find in all of Kansas City. You can see that comes in around $218,000. Then we've got Johnson County. It's the exact opposite. These are some of the most expensive you'll find in all of Kansas City. I think, Jordan, the nationwide median price right now is like somewhere around $450, maybe it's $430. Johnson County is just slightly above that, $435. And then we've got Jackson County, which is where you'll find Kansas City, Missouri proper, downtown Kansas City, and other suburbs like Lee Summit, etc. You can see that's around $252,000.
And if you look at those median prices in those other areas, in the Northland, Jackson County, Wyandotte County, that all those fall below that median national price. And so there's a ton of options if you're coming from out of state.
That's right. So the general rule of thumb is that your mortgage payment is less than 30% of your take-home pay. Our median prices mean that we certainly fit in that category, that definition of affordable housing. But again, it completely depends on who you ask. Now, one thing that we will mention here at the end of this video is new construction. You can see those prices on the screen. We're gonna break that down, but one thing you should know, this does impact you even if you buy an older home, is that our market has a lot of local builders, hundreds of local builders. We don't have many national builders because of that reason. And usually what we find when people come in town, they tend to feel like the quality of the homes is a little bit higher than what they might be used to.
So the cost of living and all the options that we have for housing here in Kansas City is a huge pro, but it is a double-edged sword, which leads to con number one, which is the housing market competition that we have here.
That's right. And I think across the country, we're seeing a lot of this depending on where you're at. We've got a housing shortage. There just haven't been enough homes built since 2007, 2008, the Great Recession. The housing market collapsed. As a result, we're really feeling that right now. And the reason why is because most people who bought their home several years ago, at least most mortgages across the country, they're below 4%. Mortgage rates today are between 6 and 7%. So for a lot of people, they feel stuck in their home. It doesn't make sense to sell it even though it doesn't quite fit their day-to-day needs. As a result, we don't have a ton of options that are on the market. We do, but there's quite a housing shortage going on, and that competition can sometimes drive up the price.
Plus, the other thing that keeps it so competitive is there is a massive amount of people moving here to Kansas City from everywhere.
That's right. So one of the biggest things that we see, at least in terms of prices, usually the higher the price, the less competition there is. It completely different depends on the area. So around Kansas City, I'd say anything under 300, it can be very difficult to find a home because of how competitive it is and because so many people are looking in that price bracket. So some things that we do, we typically want to shield you from as much competition as possible. It's how you get a better deal, how you negotiate a better price for yourself. The way we do that is finding outlier suburbs. And if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to recommend some to you. But quite frankly, Joe, we could see this competition up to 500. We can see it sometimes on $1 million+ homes. And that's really just part of the kind of dark truth about the housing market and about how competitive it is.
Yeah, it really depends on the location, on those prices, and then, where they've priced it, the house.
Exactly. So aside from looking at kind of outlier area, not bad parts of town, just parts of town where not everybody's looking, there are always outliers on the market. We've given advice to a lot of clients of looking at new construction. If that's a price point that makes sense for you, it's first come, first serve. There's no competing. And oftentimes you can negotiate with the builders, but negotiating with a home seller is a completely different story with the housing shortage. And I think the third major thing to keep in mind here is knowing when to negotiate. Right now, we've got a lot of properties sitting on the market. We've taken some big swings on some. We had one that was $100K off the list price, had another that was like $25K off. But it completely depends on the time of year, the situation, how long the property's been on the market. So the competition, it's not insurmountable. You can overcome it. It just requires the right strategy. So before we move on to pro number 2, any questions buying, building a home in the Kansas City suburbs? We're licensed real estate agents in Kansas and Missouri. We'd love to set you up for success, shield you from competition, and make sure you get the pros of our housing market and minimize the kind of the downside con there. So feel free to give us a phone call, text message, email. We'd love to set you up for success.
So this leads us to pro number 2, which is things to do in Kansas City. There's kind of a stigma that there's not much to do here. We don't have mountains, we don't have beaches, but in reality, there's a ton of things to do here. So we do have a lot of dining, a lot of golf courses, a lot of lakes.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. If you're looking for beaches and mountains, this is not it. But aside from those two, I think there's a ton of things that could be of interest to you. So, for example, we have clients coming into town from like Colorado, California, all over the country, where you do have some of those mountains, beaches, etc. If those things are important to you, you want some semblance of them in Kansas City, here's some of the places I'd look at. Parkville. Beautiful. It's got a lot of elevation changes. You've got Riz Lake there. You've got Weatherby Lake right there.
It's right on the Missouri River where they have the river walk path.
Tons of hiking trails. Lee Summit on the Missouri side. It's one of my, if I lived in Missouri, that's where I'd live. You got 5 lakes surrounding it. It's a small town feel. You got a lot of outdoors things that you could do. In Johnson County, you've got Lake Olathe. I think that whole area is just beautiful. If you want the elevation changes, treetops, beautiful views, West Lenexa, Western Shawnee, you'll have Shawnee Mission Park there. And then, of course, one of the big ones is we're a sports town.
Yep, sports towns. We've got the Kansas City Chiefs, Kansas City Royals. We have Sporting KC, which is a professional men and women's soccer team. We also have minor league baseball and a minor league hockey team.
Yeah, and the reason that's so important is because the success of the Chiefs, the prospect of new stadiums, there's been a lot of attention coming to Kansas City. We've seen a lot of development. We've got a brand new airport. I'm not saying that's because of the Chiefs, kind of unrelated there. We've got a lot of employers looking at this area. And on top of all of that, we've got a pretty big food scene, right? Barbecue capital of the world. You've seen that in all the other videos. But something we've had in our back pocket for a long time, Kansas City, Kansas, Wyandotte County. It's the taco capital of the world. So there you go. But really all over the metro, all 4 different main areas in Kansas City, you're gonna find a ton of things to do. And it's not just like this kind of flat land in the middle of the country, even though it seems that, and that might be true of Western Kansas, I'll tell you that. But here in Kansas City, there's a ton going on. Now, while we have a ton of things to do, one of the questions we get time and time again actually leads us to con number 2, and that happens to be the crime. And the reason this is such a big question we get asked is because if you look at those lists of like the top, like the murder capitals of the world or the top 10 dangerous places to live, like obviously St. Louis is like way high on that list, but Kansas City, Missouri shows up as well. And that can certainly be a cause for concern. Like the last thing you want to do is move to an area and not feel safe in that area. So even though we are real estate agents and we can't like give you specifics, and we certainly don't want to steer you, we're going to give you what we hear on the ground from locals and also the data that we see online. We're going to share some of those sources. So a couple distinctions to make. Number one is most people that move to Kansas City don't actually move to Kansas City.
Yeah, that's right, Nick. A lot of times people move to Kansas City, or they say they're in Kansas City, but they're really not. They're in a suburb somewhere outside of Kansas City, Missouri. And a lot of the crime that we see, if you dig into the stats, or look at police reports, a lot of it is like very local, personal crime that's going on. And a lot of it too is concentrated in certain areas of the city.
That's right, and that's important. It's localized, it's not widespread, and that's what you'll see if you look at crime reports, which there are a ton of them all over the internet. I think the second major thing to think about is there is a big difference from like Kansas City, Missouri that shows up on the list and all of the other suburbs. And I'll give you one, which is Overland Park. It's consistently rated as one of the top suburbs in the entire country, not just Kansas City. And one of the big ones is the quality of life there. So you do have quite a bit of that contrast between many of the different areas in Kansas City. And if you think back to that housing portion of this video where we talk about the home prices, it certainly is reflected there. And that's why you have such a variability in terms of the prices of homes as well as the types of homes that you can find there. And then finally, the third thing that we want to point you to is always like reviews on niche.com. It'll give you a really good idea if a certain area or suburb you're interested in, if people on the ground that live there, if they feel safe there. You can always look at crime maps online. And one that I like to search is actually, if you type into Google Reddit plus the name of the city, you're gonna find a lot of uncensored opinions there. People with nothing to lose, they're posting anonymously, and they're gonna give you kind of the raw, unfiltered truth in some instances. But really, when it comes to crime, just to recap, we hear that it's localized, not widespread. There are a lot of suburbs in the area that aren't quite in the same condition as like Kansas City, Missouri, which is what you see on those lists. And finally, there are a ton of resources online to vet an area, a neighborhood, a suburb, to make sure that you feel safe in the home you eventually do buy or build here in Kansas City. Now that being said, if you are on the fence and you're still worried about this, we're gonna answer the tornado stuff in a second, which you might also be worried about. But feel free, any questions, if you're interested in buying or building a home, you wanna find the right neighborhood, you wanna make sure it checks all of your boxes, it's a phone call, text message, email, and we'd love to set you up for success.
Now moving on, one of the most common things that we get asked about are these schools and which ones are the best ones. Well, we'll get into that shortly, but right now we got to get to pro number 3, which is drivability of the city.
Now, the nice thing about Kansas City, we did the whole bit about like everybody who moves to Kansas City, like very few people actually end up moving to Kansas City, Missouri. Well, the nice thing is we've got a ton of suburbs, and Kansas City's metro area has a ton of variability, which is what we talked about during the home prices. The nice part of that is that you can get around the entire metro, depending on where you are, usually in about 30 minutes, which is very nice. So going to like the Chiefs Stadium, a Royals game, going to the airport, etc. Again, you're gonna get to places very, very quickly. So even though it seems very, very spread out, travel time isn't as bad as most very big cities. Like I would say Dallas, Texas would be just a nightmare, especially during rush hour.
And like Nick, he lives in Northeast Johnson County, which is close to downtown Kansas City. And you said, what, 30 minutes and you can get almost
pretty much
any
anywhere.
Suburb?
That's right. Now, if you're like way far south in like Kansas City, Missouri or Overland Park, whole different story. But I imagine if you're there, you're probably not spending a lot of time downtown or a lot of time up north.
Yeah, so I live in South Olathe and I can get to the Legends, or I can get to Lee Summit in 30 minutes, or even downtown Kansas City from where I live.
That's right. So one of the nice things, a ton of things to do in Kansas City, the drivability, it's pretty good. It's not too bad. One thing to know is there's a lot of construction going on major highways right now. We do see some slowdowns because of it, but it's sort of an investment, right? A little discomfort now for something a little more comfortable down the road. Another thing is, sometimes we do get traffic jams, but it's not like it happens all the time. It might just be bad weather, but that would just be one thing to consider. It's not like stop-start traffic.
Yeah, normally that would be, there are very specific areas during rush hour where you will get some traffic jams, or if there is bad weather, like Nick said, or if there's a car wreck or something like that. But one thing that makes our road or our drivability so great here is all the interstates. Right. We have I-35, I-70, the 435 loop, and then there's just a ton of other arteries as well.
Now that being said, it does come with a con, which is having to do a lot of driving, right? There's some give and take, there's push and pull for all of these. That would be one. If you want an area of town that's very walkable, we do have urban parts of town, around Kansas City, but they're very localized. It's not going to be like you can, pick anywhere on the map and you're going to be able to walk to the nearest coffee shop. If you are moving here, expect to have a car, expect to drive. The nice thing is, a lot of these cities are like principal cities where you could, like Overland Park, Olathe, for example, you could move there and you'd never have to leave. You would never have to go downtown unless you really wanted to. And what that also means is that many of each of these cities have their own shopping, their own downtown area. So like Jordan, you mentioned the Legends outlets in Kansas City, Kansas, and Wyandotte. That's huge. People from all over the metro go there. But if you live right there, it's like 5 to 10 minutes away. If you live in like Piper, Kansas, for example, and imagine that, but in each different main area around Kansas City. And that's one of the nice kind of clawbacks from this. You're in your car a lot, as you have access to a lot of places. You can get there pretty quickly.
I promised we'd get to the schools, and here we are at pro number 4, which is the school systems that we have here in Kansas City.
Yeah, and this is a big one for a lot of people, and I think it matters even if you don't care about the public schools, even if you don't have kids, because one thing it does impact property taxes, the value of your home, and how well it appreciates over time. And I think anybody buying or building a new home probably cares about those things. So, we're working with clients right now, a couple of whom, like the school, is their main deciding factor between two different homes. But the nice thing is, all over the Kansas City area, we got some phenomenal public schools, according to greatschools.org and niche.com, and it's one of the main reasons people are moving to the area. So just to name off some of like the top rated ones on niche.com, you've got the Blue Valley School District in Overland Park, Kansas. It happens to be nationally ranked as one of the best in the entire country, which is very impressive. You've also got on the Missouri side, the Lee Summit R7 School District. You got the Blue Springs School District out there. And then really in Johnson County, that's where you'll see a lot of the very highly rated districts like Olathe, etc. But one area of Kansas City that I think is really underrated and is causing a lot of people to move there because of the schools is the Northland.
That's right, Nick. There's a lot of different cities, a lot of different suburbs in the Northland, such as Parkville, Kearney, Liberty, all with great school ratings.
That's right. If you think back to the home prices, good schools is nice, but that's also where you can find some slightly more affordable homes than in Johnson County, for example. But the best resource, niche.com, greatschools.org, read some reviews. The best thing is setting foot here in town, doing a discovery trip, talking to some school administrators, getting a little bit deeper in that, because not all the ratings will reflect the priorities that you have for your children.
Now, there is one mini con to having these great schools, and that's that some of these boundaries overlap amongst the cities and everything else. So one example of that would be Blue Valley School District, mostly in Overland Park, but it also rolls into portions of Olathe, and then you have like Spring Hill School District, which rolls into Olathe and Overland Park.
That's right. So it can be tricky, and like we've had situations like one neighborhood in Overland Park should be in the Blue Valley School District, zoned to Olathe. So that's one of the things that you got to make sure you do your research. And again, we want to be a resource to you. So any questions on that, this is what we do. We've helped dozens and dozens of families make this same decision. A lot of the times, schools are a big priority. Last thing that you should know about schools on the Kansas side, they did pass open enrollment. It's a school choice bill, which essentially says as a taxpayer, as long as there's space available in a certain school, even if you weren't zoned to that school, you can apply to get into it. So that's certainly nice. And maybe we'll see something on the Missouri side here before too long.
So with having all those great schools comes with a little bit of a con here, which is higher property taxes. You know, here in Kansas City, they range anywhere from like 1.3 to 1.6%. It really just depends on where you live.
And for some of you, that might be lower than what you're used to. And for some of you, it might be higher. But the reason this is a con, we mentioned the competitive housing market. Home prices have been going up. A large part of housing expenses for people who already live here is those increased property tax. We're also seeing insurance start to go up. And that can be a major headache. Like there's a big issue going on in Jackson County where they assess property values a little bit too high. I'm not going to get into all the nuances, but it's an absolute nightmare. And at the same time, we have a lot of cities like Lenexa or Shawnee, because they've taken in so much revenue from all these increased home prices and home values, they're actually starting to decrease property taxes. So again, a little bit of push and pull here, but property taxes, like you said, Jordan, anywhere from like 1.3 to 1.5, 1.52. It completely depends on everything from the school district, the county, the city, all of the things. So we've got a video, I'll link it down in the description. We put together a whole spreadsheet. If you buy a home, if you work with us, we calculate these for each property we find. There's a lot that goes into it, but it's certainly one where you don't want to underestimate and then have a larger bill than you're expecting.
And one thing to note too is that sales taxes around the city are pretty similar throughout. I mean, there are going to be cities that might be 0.5% to 1% different. But one thing to take note too is Kansas City, Missouri, whether you live or work there, there is a 1% earnings income tax.
That's right. Not the biggest deal in the world, but it can get complicated if you live in Kansas and you work in Missouri or vice versa. So it's usually best to work and live in the same state just to simplify the taxes. So do keep that in mind. Now we're going to switch things up a little bit. We're going to hit you with another con, and that would be the weather. Now, before we even filmed this video, we had all of our notes out, we knew what we were going to talk about. And then a blizzard struck through the city and set records for like 10 to 12 inches of snow that we both had to shovel off of our driveways yesterday. So a little wrench in the gears here, but the reason this is a con is because our weather can really be volatile. Like one day in the winter, it can be 50 degrees, sunny, people are outside walking the dog, we're in shorts, and it's all nice. And then the next day we have a blizzard, which doesn't happen often. It's an anomaly, but that's part of the unpredictability of our weather.
Yeah, I've seen 70-degree days, and then later that night it's freezing rain.
Now, really the big one that I know a lot of you have concerns about, we get questions all the time when people are thinking about moving, and that's tornadoes, right? It's Kansas gets this like big flat piece of land in the middle of the country that just gets destroyed by tornadoes.
Tornado Alley.
Luckily, that's not quite the case for us here in Kansas City, and I'll knock on wood. The reason I say it that way is because we are in Tornado Alley. A lot of the tornadoes that touch down and cause real damage, they're in central, western Kansas, and actually more tornadoes touch down in like Oklahoma and Texas than they do here in Kansas City. So I've lived here my whole life. I haven't been through it, knock on wood, and then you as well.
Same here. Luckily, I've never seen one. I do want to see one, but I haven't seen one, which is probably a good thing.
Now, even if, because we mentioned the blizzard, and while that's an anomaly, well, couldn't a tornado be an anomaly? Yes, it absolutely could, and that's why we have basements in most homes around Kansas City. There are some builders building homes on slab, but a lot of those will have storm shelters. So we certainly have things that we can do to protect ourselves. Luckily, we're kind of outside of where most of those tornadoes actually form and touch down. And if they don't touch down, they end up not causing a ton of damage, just high winds, rains, etc. Now, the final thing that you should know, we talked about this, the blizzard and all the snow. Usually, in terms of very low temperatures, it lasts about 2 weeks during the winter. And typically we get about 18 inches of snow, period, for the whole year. Now, granted, this year we got 10 to 12 in 1 to 2 days. So there's always a chance of that. But the point being, you got to be ready for some very variable and versatile weather, which means you got to have your whole wardrobe out pretty much year round.
As volatile as weather can be here in Kansas City, that's going to lead us right into pro number 5, which is that we do have beautiful 4 seasons of weather. So right now it's wintertime, it's cold, there's snow on the ground, but here in a couple months it's going to be spring, and that's one of my favorite times of year. The grass turns green, it starts to rain a little bit, and it's just beautiful temperatures.
That's right. So, the final part of that con about the weather was, while our winters can get brutal, they're not really that brutal, but when they do come in, we get those low, it's like 2 weeks and it's over most of the time. But the nicest parts of the year, definitely the spring. Very nice, great weather, everything's perfect. The humidity really starts to ratchet up in the summers, but really the fall as well, right before it starts to get really cold. We had a pretty long summer this year. Temperatures.
We had a really nice fall too, and you get all the color changes with the trees, and that's something that we hear from our clients is that they've never seen that before, and it is absolutely beautiful.
That's right. So if you're down south and you're dealing with some brown grass, it's usually not the case here in Kansas. And if you're up north dealing with a lot of snow, it can happen here. It's just a little bit less. Now, final pro and con in this video, we're wrapping them into one, is another double-edged sword, and that would be new construction. And that's one of the things that we specialize in. I know a lot of you are interested in buying or building a home here, given the lower prices you might be used to. The pro side of this is that our market's different from all the other markets across the country in that we have hundreds of local builders. I know a lot of markets, you've got a lot of national builders, maybe regional. We have a couple of those, and that's starting to increase. Hundreds of local builders make it very hard to compete. A lot of them are generational builders that have been around for a very long time. It's part of the family business. And on top of that, it generally pushes the quality up and gives you a ton of choices and a lot of levels of customization.
And with that, it becomes kind of a con because then you really need to know what you're looking into whenever you're wanting to buy or build new construction homes in Kansas City, because all these builders do things differently, whether it's how they price their homes or the standard of materials that they use. But like Nick said, one thing that is for sure is the quality is always a little higher.
That's right. So, one common question is, who's the best builder? And my response is always, well, what type of home are you looking to build? Where do you want to build it? What kind of price range are we looking at? Because for each of those possible answers, I probably got 5 to 10 different suggestions. And one of the nice things here is it's not like you're hiring a massive, national corporation with a lot of red tape. Some of our favorite builders it's like one guy who's been doing it for a very long time. It's been passed down from, father to son again. And there's just a level of customer service that you get. Like we've got builders that we're working with, right? We could pick up the phone and call them. And I just don't know where else you would be able to find that around Kansas City. So definitely a big pro. It also ups the ante in the amount of research and knowledge you have going into it, because choosing the wrong builder, the wrong community, the wrong floor plan can get very, very expensive. Now, with all of that said, Jordan, I think we've got a clear verdict here.
You need to move to Kansas City.
That's right, and call us before you buy or build a home, and we'd love to help. If you found this helpful, we'd like to make it specific to you, your family, your situation, and what you're looking for, really, because this is usually a big decision. Hopefully this is a home you plan on living in for a very long time, and that makes the decision even more important because your quality of life, it compounds every single day, and we'd like to make sure you maximize it as much as possible. So let us know if you have any questions. Phone call, text message, email, all that contact info is down below. And before you go, we're gonna put one video on the screen here. Jordan's gonna point to it. This is a full relocated to Kansas City video. It takes you start to finish. We break down the main areas, things you need to think about, and finally the actual process, the logistics of making the move. So click right there and we'll see you on the other side.